The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the members and associates of the Victoria Zen Centre to you. If you enjoy it, please be sure to let your friends know about Living Zen. If you'd like to support our community, here are a few ways that you can do it. Download the Living Zen podcast app for iPod, iPhone, or Android. You can also purchase additional Zen Talks by Venerable Eshu on iTunes or Amazon.com. One of the most meaningful ways to show your support is by joining our Sangha as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen podcast and our online e-Zendo will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at www.zenwest.ca and click on the membership tab. Thank you for your support. Mumonkan, Case 44, Bajiao's staff. The priest Bajiao said to his assembly, "If you have a staff, I will give you a staff. If you have no staff, I will take a staff from you." Wu Men says, "It helps you to cross the stream when the bridge is broken down. It guides you back to the village on a moonless night. If you call it a staff, you enter hell like an arrow." Wu Men's verse says, "The depths and the shallows of the world are all in his grasp. It supports the heavens and sustains the earth. Everywhere it enhances the doctrine." So today's case, I guess before I start, I should say welcome. New student in the Zendo. I feel kind of, I'm sorry, because you're entering in the last few cases of the Mumonkan, and so this is kind of thick stuff. So I'll just ask you to be patient, and I'll try to go easy. And if you like, you can start at the very beginning on the podcast. So it might take a little while. But it's not so bad because I don't think that there's anybody, when we first look at these kinds of cases, they don't give us much to hang on to. So you kind of have to break them down a fair bit. Last week I talked about another kind of staff. There was another case with a different kind of staff. And this is a shakujo, or a shujo, it's called in Japanese, which is a full-length sort of walking staff. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So before we get into what the heck this Bajiao is talking about, I want to talk about the staff, the sort of accoutrement of the Zen teacher. The staff is one of the oldest historical pieces of gear that monks were allowed to keep, to have, to own as a possession. Monks, right from the beginning, with the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, were only allowed very few possessions: a robe, a water bottle, a needle to repair your robe. And one of the items was a staff. And the staff wasn't just sort of ornamental, it served several purposes. Originally, the staff was about as tall as the monk, and it had some metal rings on the top of it. And this was for the monks were mendicant, and they were quite itinerant. They traveled around all over northern India, walking from one place to the other, oftentimes just following the Buddha. But also a big part of their practice was they would cloister together for the rainy season and practice and train together. And then when the rainy season was over, they would disperse to their original home communities where they would share the Dharma with the people who were there. So there was a lot of traveling going on. And in those days, traveling wasn't like it is today. They didn't go by plane, and they didn't often go by carriage even. They walked. And so in northern India, there are all kinds of hazards. And at the time, there were significantly more hazards. So you could use a staff to discover the depth of a particular river or stream that was needed to cross, to see if you could do it or keep yourself balanced while you did it. It could be used to alert or to scare away animals that might otherwise eat you as you're traveling. It could be used to move a snake or some other kind of creature out of the way so that your path could be clear to where it was that you're going. And so each of the pieces, many of the pieces of gear after the Buddha died became sort of symbolic for the physical body of the Buddha. So, for example, this staff, this walking staff, becomes a symbol of the Buddha's legs, the path itself, or the ability to walk the path. And in that much, as it continues into China, this tradition of this staff, a teacher's staff or a monk's staff, it becomes a symbol of the teaching, the law, the Dharma, our original nature itself. And so when we have these teachers sort of brandishing staffs, they're not just this sort of physical threat or a physical object. It's a fairly loaded symbol. And so when we're being asked questions or being asked to express something in regards to a staff, it's not just, well, I guess we could... In some ways, it is just a stick, just as we are just a person. But in other ways, these staves are symbolic of not only that individual teacher's teaching, but of the Dharma itself, of the teaching, the law, the fundamental way, in a sort of universal sense. So when we have a teacher sort of brandishing it this way, we have to sort of pay attention, sit up. Now, it's really interesting. I've learned that as Zen developed, the tradition of the staff sort of diverged in a couple of ways. In a way, in the Soto school, I've seen that the tradition of this sort of kind of refined shakujo, shujo, has been maintained. So you'll often see kind of very nice staff with a metal top piece on it. I actually have an example in the interview room if you want to see the piece. And in the Rinzai school, they went another way. And so if you go and look at the Japanese Rinzai masters' staffs, they're often these sort of crooked, gangly sticks that they've pulled out of the mountain where they live. And it's something else that I wanted to mention about mountain, the use of the word mountain. In the chant that we do both in the morning and the one right before the talk, we do the final instruction of Daito. And in the first part of that, we chant, in English we chant, all you people who've come into the Zendo, right? But the actual translation of this is all of you people who have come into this mountain. And this comes from the tradition of Zen monks taking up residence at the base of or on the side of a mountain. And the mountain is representative, again, symbolic of the profundity or the depth of the teaching that goes on there. And I found this it's a very sort of interesting translation in the sutra that we chant, because in fact, Daito was expressing that or talking about that while he was the teacher at Daitokuji, which is in Kyoto, actually, which is not a mountain. And so what we understand is that it didn't matter. The tradition, after a while, regardless of where the teacher lands, regardless of where the temple lands, whether it's in a valley or whether it's on a riverbank, when these old teachers refer to it or refer to people coming to it, they refer to arriving at the mountain. The zendo is the mountain. And it was also the tradition that the teacher would take the name of the mountain where they taught. And so, for example, let's see. One that's great, I think, is Rinzai. Linji, actually refers to overlooking a ford. So overlooking a place where people could cross a river. And this is where his temple was. So, in the Rinzai tradition, this practice of having this sort of gnarly, sort of rustic stick comes from this idea that the teacher is kind of the mountain guardian. It's like for me, I get sort of romantic about it, so watch out. It's kind of like they've gone up into the hills of the mountain, and the staff is the symbol of their responsibility, their guardianship of the mountain on which they reside, even if it's not a mountain, as I said. Okay. All right, to continue with this story. So the priest Bajiao said to his assembly, "If you have a staff, I will give you a staff. If you have no staff, I will take a staff from you." Now this, if we approach it from a strictly logical perspective, if we look at this completely flat, it can be quite a confusing statement. If you have a staff, I will give you a staff. If you have no staff, I will take a staff from you. And I think for me, when I first looked at this case many years ago, it made no sense at all, because I would come from the perspective of whether or not a person needs a staff. And if a person needs a staff and they have a staff, why would you give them another one? And if they need a staff and you have a staff and they have a staff, or if they have no staff and they need a staff, how can you possibly take it from them? Now, one of the things, this is complex, and one of the things that I find so wonderful, Gente Osho gave me this book. This is a translation of the Mumonkan that was done by a Japanese man that I can barely read his name. I think his last name is Nakamura. Fushiki Nakamura. And apparently early when Joshu Roshi was first in North America, he was frantically writing back and forth with this man on working on this translation into English of the Mumonkan, this book that we use in Rinzai Zen cases. And what the product was a if you compare it or you look at it from a scholastic perspective, is a fairly inaccurate translation of the Mumonkan. But I find, having practiced with Joshu Roshi for some time, that what it is a very sort of heavily imbued with Joshu Roshi's perspective and teaching of the Mumonkan. And so for me, it's a very useful to sort of look at what the sort of standard scholastic or common translations of things are, and then to sort of look at what this translation says, because it often really gives very clear points. And I guess in most translations that you get a lot of footnote, pages and pages of commentary. And in this, as you can see, there's no footnotes at all. It's just the case, but often the footnotes are right in the case. And so I'll just read what this translation says. So Bajiao is the pinyin translation or pinyin pronunciation of this master's name. And this is one case where I find that that's unfortunate. I like to use the pinyin because the vast majority of these names they're Chinese people. And often when you get the Mumonkan, it's translated into Japanese. But in this case, actually Bajiao is a Korean who went to China to study Zen and ended up settling in China. So I don't know what that would be pronounced like in Korean. But in Japanese, it's Basho Osho. And this is not to be confused if you're poetry buffs with Basho the poet. They're completely different people. So Basho Osho said to his souls, soul is monk, when you manifest yourself as a staff, it follows that I have given it to you. When you manifest yourself as no staff or nothingness, it follows that I have taken it away from you. So this translation sort of gives us a way in. What we have to do, as always with this case, is to drop our external perspective of it and to take up a position, many positions within the case itself. So taking away our objective sense of looking in on this old interaction, we enter into it entirely to become a part of the action. By now, if we've been paying attention to the sort of structure or the dramatic structure, I could call it, of interaction in the Zen school, we find that oftentimes there are these presentations, oftentimes there are these interactions in which an individual presents themselves before a teacher. And it may be formally in the case of the Dharma hall or in interview, and it may be informally in the course of a day's work around the monastery or the temple. It can be informally in an interaction in a tea shop. We've seen all of these kinds of things. But what we often see is a call and response, or a demonstration and a response. And so what Bajiao is talking about in this presentation, in this demonstration, in this call, is about this interaction. If you present yourself and you have a staff, and remember that we're talking about the Zen staff. It's not just a stick or a cane or something to walk with. But what we're talking about is the manifestation, the presentation of the Dharma, the path, or if we like to go as deeply as we can, the manifestation of our true nature. Yeah. The manifestation of our true nature. And so we can imagine a monk, or even if we take up the position of the monk, of the individual, the teacher is saying, if you present yourself, if you manifest yourself in possession, having this true nature, I am manifesting my true nature. Now, I think this is a bit of a threat. Then I will give you a staff. If you take yourself as being in possession, if you take yourself as being something separate from, if you take your original face as something which is out there, which you can possess or catch or own or collect or increase, if you take this teaching, this Dharma, this path, as being something which is somehow separate from, out there, that you can have, or that you can seek, or that you can possess, then I will give you a staff. That's a very nice way of putting it. Then I will give you a staff. Bring me your staff and I'll give you a staff. These old fellows are rather rough and tumble. So we come back full circle in this case to the very first case in the Mumonkan, which is Joshu's Mu, where we talk about our original nature. Emptiness. Emptiness not as a thing, not as a place to go, not as a void, not as an absence of things, but as the very nature of all things in this vast cosmos. When we talk about, in the last case, calling it a staff, not calling it a staff, you can neither call it a staff, but you can also not call it a staff. When I talk about myself, I have to understand that simultaneously I am manifesting as self. But I must also recognize simultaneously that there is no self to be manifested. There's nothing lasting. There's nothing fixed. There's nothing permanent. There's nothing separate from everything else in this vast cosmos. The second part of Bajiao's staff is talking about the position which is opposite to I have. I am on the path. I am fully enlightened. This sort of possessive idea or position in Zen practice. The second side of this, the other side of this, is that there is no path. There is no true nature. There is nothing. Taking nothing as an object or as void or as a non-thing. Bajiao is talking about or pointing to his own teaching, and he's also pointing out two pitfalls in the path. In some ways, it's like a mirror reflection of the previous case. The point is different. We cannot grasp on this path, this dharma, this teaching, the law, is not something that we can own. It's never something that will be mine or ours. It's not something that we can protect. It's not something that we can dismantle. It's not something that we can destroy. The other side is that it isn't nothing. We cannot talk about there being no dharma, no path. And so when he talks about if you have no staff, I will take it from you. Because this is a position. This is the objectification of non-self, the solidification of emptiness, making emptiness into an object. And so when he's talking about his teaching, he's saying, if you come with the object of plus, if you make plus, the activity of plus, an object, a thing, and you're hanging on to it, then I'll smack it from you. And if you come to me with the object of minus, if you make the activity of minus, emptiness, object, then I will take that from you as well. Each and every thing that we come into contact with in this cosmos manifests two activities, the plus activity and the minus activity. We can talk about things as existent, this tree, this rock, this person, this relationship, this environment. And we can, from a subjective perspective, understand and experience the existence of those things. But simultaneously, we, from the Zen school, we recognize that these things are also non-existent, in the sense that they are entirely made up of other things. There is no substance which remains unchanged, which remains fixed, which remains intransient, permanent, lasting, and separate. We can talk about things as existent, recognizing that fundamentally they are no thing at all. And yet, what is all of this? And this is what Bajiao is pointing to. When we take up a tool, we do not use it as a tool. And this is something that is realized by musicians, by artists, by warriors, by cyclists, by dancers, by actors, by anyone who engages with this world in a way that makes relationship. This is something that is affirmed. Because we say when we paint, you can paint with a paintbrush. But art, we say, isn't made until the paintbrush, the paint, and the canvas, or whatever it is that we're painting on, become a part of us. When we recognize that these subjective discriminations, these discrete breaks that we make between all of these objects are just objects of the mind. They're distinctions of the mind. And when we actually embrace this, when we make this whole relationship that continues from the thought to the manifestation of the painting, we experience the complete manifestation of the path, the complete manifestation of the activity of the cosmos. The carpenter does this with a hammer. The artist does it with a brush. The martial artist does it with a sword or with a gun if you're a soldier. This experience can be felt in any activity that we do. If we're a scientist, we use the tools in the laboratory, electron microscope. How do you manifest one true nature with the electron microscope? When does that become your own eyes? When we recognize that this object is not just a construct of the human mind, but is a manifestation of the fundamental activity which is also manifested in us, then we don't look at this object as such a foreign body. We don't have to hold it outside of us so much and look at it as some artificial thing, but recognize it as not different. When we work together with it, then we become one, and we find our way home. Not just home to where we live, but home in the experience of our original nature. Isn't this the case for those of you who write, or those of you who paint, or those of you who study? When we have that realization, when subject and object, or what we call subject and object, when what we're doing it with, manifests as one, there is an experience of home. Inside and outside dissolve. This is what Mumonkan is pointing to in his comments. If we understand the staff is the primary or most sort of like significant tool of the Zen teacher. And when we see a Zen teacher with a staff, we can break them into two. When we see an artist and the thing that they make their art with, we break them into two. When we see a scientist and their equipment, we break them into two. And when Mumonkan makes this comment, we have to understand that this staff, the relationship with the staff, that he's talking about this path. He's talking about allowing the subjective, discriminating self to dissolve into a unity, into a unification with the object, with the very path itself. He says, it helps you to cross the stream when the bridge is broken down. It guides you back to the village on a moonless night. Another way I thought I'd like to look at this is really understanding the value of this practice that we engage in. When we find difficulty, there is always a staff through our practice, through the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It helps you to cross the stream when the bridge is broken down. It guides you back to the village on a moonless night. Or another way that we could say this is, in any circumstances, it will bring you home. This is why Mumonkan says, if you call it a staff, you enter hell like an arrow. If we mistake these objects, these so-called mundane things that we interact with in the world as objects, if we look at these people that we make relationships with, if we look at these structures and environments that we use to support our lives as objects, as inanimate things that have no value, then we miss the whole game. We miss the whole thing. If you call it a staff, you enter hell like an arrow. Hell, I don't think that Mumonkan is talking about like a pit drops in the floor and into the burning realms of hell you drop. I think what we're pointing at here, and this is not something that we have to wait to the end of our lives to experience. What he's pointing to here is the accessible reality that when we look at other as something which is distinctly separate, that I can benefit from the other's loss, or that somehow our experience of life is not connected. As soon as we buy that, as soon as we engage in that, then we enter into the world of suffering. The more firmly rooted we are in looking at things and objects and our world as being subjective or absolutely separate, distinct, unrelated, the more firmly we grasp that, the more suffering we find in our own experience and in the experience of those around us. And this is what Mumonkan is pointing to. If we start walking around and grasping things as objects, then our world becomes a world of suffering. Mumonkan's verse says, the depths and the shallows of the world are all in his grasp. And this is something that I really find interesting. So Mumonkan, we can do this. Mumonkan in his verse makes he's talking about Bajiao as a great teacher. And I guess this is mostly Aitken Roshi's translation of this, Robert Aitken Roshi. All in his grasp, talking about the staff as a symbol of the Dharma. Talking about his grasp, he's demonstrating this wholeheartedly. Now, this translation here, I like it better, actually. He says, all sides, the deep and the shallow, are all in its grasp. This to me points to that there is nothing outside of this fundamental activity. The depths, the shallows, me, you, the trees, the stones, the electron microscopes, arising from one source, Dharmakaya, as we call it in the Zen tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, our original home. You can adjust, this what the bell means, that you can adjust your posture. I'm not going to go on for too much longer, I don't think. But then I've said that before too. It supports the heavens and sustains the earth. Everywhere it enhances the doctrine. Or, if you like, it holds up the sky and supports the earth. Wherever it stands, it manifests the doctrine. The doctrine is this dharma, is this fundamental law. Now, the point of this is that often we ask sort of how we can practice, or how we can deepen our practice, or how we can better understand Buddhism, the teaching of the Buddha. And Zen is not a philosophical school. It's not a school that's interested in pursuing a better conceptual understanding of the canonical, scriptural teachings of Buddhism. It's a school that's fundamentally aimed at the realization of awakening, of experiencing this activity rather than knowing about it. Because when we know about it, it's like, I guess to carry a metaphor, it would be like collecting staffs, but never using one. So you can have this fantastic knowledge of different types of woods and different kinds of carving styles and the cultural and ethnic ecological origins of the various types of staffs. But if you never bother to try one out, if you don't carry one with you, if you don't have that relationship, then we're not doing Zen. So the point of this case is that wherever we go, or whatever we're doing, whatever we're working with, whatever relationship that we're engaged in, whatever environment that we find ourselves immersed in, our practice is to find our way home. Our practice is to engage with that as not separate, but to intimately embrace the activities, the objects that we are with as not separate. And in doing so, recognize our original nature, awaken. When we do this, when we experience what we're doing, where we're doing it, anything that we're doing it with, we have this experience, this moment of finding home. We have this moment of our anguish, of our resistance, of fear and anger dropping away. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.